Border wall prototypes. Are they as tough as President Trump hopes? A government report says maybe not, finding the mock-ups are vulnerable to a known breaching method.
I realize that they have a lot of folks now in these jumbo shelter tents, but they're not getting a lot of people out of homelessness.
The San Diego City Council is taking up tent shelters tomorrow and looking at the pros and cons of their current system of housing the homeless.
He's not a typical zoo rhino. He's been living with Cape buffalo and with African antelope and African birds.
And a San Diego bred rhino leaves his home for a wild adventure across the world. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Susan Murphy. President Trump has said his promised border wall would stop people from breaking into the U.S., but a government report obtained by KPBS shows all 8 mock-ups of the wall in Otay Mesa could be broken. KPBS investigative reporter Jean Guerrero has the story from Otay Mesa.
I'm here next to Brownfield Air Station on a road called Pogo Row, where there are all these auto part vendors. Somewhere in this area is where the government tested 8 mock-ups of Trump's border wall for how well they resist breaching. The exact location was never unveiled because the government wanted to make sure smugglers couldn't watch and get any ideas. The mock-ups were based on 8 prototypes for Trump's wall that were unveiled last October. In November and December, the 10-foot mock-ups were tested for breaching. No video was available of the testing, and it was done away from public view. But KPBS obtained a copy of the testing results from U.S. Customs and Border Protection through a Freedom of Information Act request. The report is heavily redacted, but it reveals that every single mock-up was deemed vulnerable to at least one breaching method tried by tactical teams. That method was rescheduled to be the last for each mock-up after it was found to, quote, impact the structural integrity of the entire mock-up. One of the mock-ups was so damaged that testing had to be stopped for safety. The prototypes themselves were tested for scaling, but almost the entire section on scaling is redacted, so it's unclear how they performed. Also, the report shows no evidence that the government tested how well the barriers resist the creation of tunnels beneath them. The prototype project cost $20 million. Congress still hasn't approved funding for the actual border wall. From Otay Mesa, Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
A spokesman for CPB says the prototypes weren't meant to be indestructible. He says instead they were meant to inform the design of future barriers in order to impede illegal entry efforts. For more on this investigation, go to kpbs.org. San Diego was once a top destination for refugees, but that changed when the Trump administration significantly cut arrivals to the U.S. KPBS reporter Taryn Mento says an announcement from the State Department today means next year could bring even fewer refugees.
The State Department proposed a record low cap of 30,000 refugees next year. This past year's ceiling of 45,000 refugees was the previous low. San Diego resettled more than 4,000 newcomers during a surge in 2016 under the Obama administration. Last year, when President Donald Trump cut refugee arrivals, that declined to about 2,600. And this year, as of August, that figure is less than 800. Despite the reduction, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the proposed cap of 30,000 refugees still reflects America's generosity.
This year's proposed refugee ceiling must be considered in the context of the many other forms of protection and assistance offered by the United States. Moreover, the refugee ceiling number should not be viewed in isolation from other expansive humanitarian programs.
Pompeo also referenced the $8 billion that the U.S. has spent last year supporting humanitarian efforts worldwide, which he said was more than any other country. The proposed refugee ceiling for next year could mean even less funding for agencies that provide employment and support services for new and former refugees. A national relief agency is pushing the public to contact Congress and oppose the 30,000 figure. However, similar efforts last year were unsuccessful. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
Tomorrow, San Diego City Council members will be asked to continue funding 3 tents that are temporarily sheltering homeless people. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says the program is getting more expensive.
You have facilities at this end, so you have the restrooms, you have laundry services.
Deacon Jim Vargas is showing me around the temporary tent shelter at 14th and Commercial. He's the CEO of Father Joe's Villages, which runs this shelter for 150 single women and families with children. Vargas says the program is a worthwhile investment.
We need it. I mean, in aggregate, I mentioned our 150. In aggregate, there's 700 individuals who, if not for these shelters, would be on the streets, right? So it's definitely doing good. It's keep bringing people into a shelter and providing sanitary conditions and providing the services that they need.
If council members approve their extension, the tents will cost the city $14 million this fiscal year, and that's mostly coming from funds previously earmarked for permanent low-income housing. Michael McConnell is an advocate for the homeless and a frequent critic of the mayor's policies on homelessness. He says the city council has no good options right now.
They're up against the wall here. I realize that they have a lot of folks now in these jumbo shelter tents, but they're not getting a lot of people out of homelessness, and recent reports are that the numbers downtown are going back up again. So they failed to reduce homelessness on the streets of downtown, and they're eating up a lot of money that could be used for permanent solutions.
There's something else council members will vote on Tuesday, lowering the goals for getting shelter residents into permanent housing. Officials say the previous goals were unrealistic. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
That tent, operated by Father Joe's, is scheduled to close next spring to make way for more than 400 apartments for formerly homeless individuals. The North County Transit District is considering raising fares for bus and train services. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman says this comes as overall ridership for the Transit District is down.
Between its trains and buses, the North County Transit District says overall ridership in June compared to June of last year was down 5%. That translates to a loss of 46,000 trips. The Transit District says customer revenue has declined due to the loss in ridership. On Thursday, the Transit Board will hear a presentation about fares increasing for buses and trains. The proposed increase for Breeze buses is 75 cents per ride. Sprinter trains would go up 50 cents per ticket, while the coaster rates would increase $1. The Transit District says rates have not increased since 2007, and the proposed rate hike would bring in over $1 million in additional revenue. The NCTD plans to hold a number of public meetings on the proposed rate increases. Any change would have to be approved by the Sandag Board of Directors. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
Transgender foster youth in California will now have access to health care that is consistent with their gender identity. Governor Jerry Brown signed the bill today, authored by San Diego area Assemblyman Todd Gloria. Current state law mandates that foster youth have a right to medical, dental, vision, and mental health services. The new law adds the right to seek gender reassignment procedures and the alleviation of gender dysphoria symptoms. In a statement, Gloria said, "This is the beginning of a new and hopeful day for the many foster youth in California. With the signing of this bill, we tell our foster youth that no matter who you are or how you identify, there's a place for you in California." The law also mandates that the state's social and health care services departments develop guidelines on how to best assist foster youth who are seeking access to gender-affirming health care. The initial votes to potentially confirm Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court were planned for this week, but a new allegation from his teenage years might derail his nomination. Christine Ford, a college professor in Palo Alto, says she was attacked by Kavanaugh during a party they both attended in Maryland in the 1980s. Kavanaugh strongly denies it. Late this afternoon, it was announced both will testify next week before senators. Ford's lawyer spoke on NBC's Today Show about why she is coming forward. President Trump also spoke earlier today.
The question to you is, does she consider this an attempted rape?
She does. She clearly considers this an attempted rape. She believes that if it were not for the severe intoxication of Brett Kavanaugh, she would have been raped.
Has he offered to withdraw?
Next question. What a ridiculous question that is.
Do you think his passport confirmation?
Say it.
Do you think his passport confirmation is on track?
Oh, I think he's on track, yeah. I mean, I think he's very much on track. If they delay it a little bit just to make sure everybody's happy, they want to be happy. I can tell you, the Republican senators want to be 100% happy themselves. They're doing it very, very professionally. Again, this should have been brought up a long time ago.
Some key Republicans, like Maine Senator Susan Collins, are among those who called for public testimony. PBS NewsHour will have a lot more on this story coming up at 7. Police in Texas say a Border Patrol supervisor has confessed to the murders of 4 women. Police say Juan David Ortiz knew his victims and had their trust before the murders. He was arrested Saturday in Laredo and is being held on a $2.5 million bond.
There's probable cause to believe that this individual is responsible for this series of murders, which I would qualify as a serial murder that we have. So we will be looking at what charges to put on him, potentially 4 charges of murder and aggravated kidnapping.
Police say the victims were sex workers, and there may be more than the 4 who have already been found. A San Diego transplant is getting acclimated to his new home in Tanzania today. He's an 8-year-old rhinoceros. And while it's not completely unheard of, it's pretty rare for a zoo to release captive animals into the wild. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson spent some time with the rhino before he left town.
Senior keeper Sandy Craig unlocks the door to the African Swamp exhibit's livestock barn. Craig and keeper Mike Veal are bringing treats to an eastern black rhino. A bucket full of carrots and apples are among his favorites.
What's up, big guy? Hey, who's my favorite rhino? Who's my favorite?
The 8-year-old bull named Eric is active and, as Craig puts it, sassy. She says it's important to read his moods.
I call it like the quiet eyes, where he's blinking slowly, not with big eyes looking around anxiously. Same with the ears. You kind of know when the ears are calm and not alert. So those are the small cues.
Months of close-quarter training are showing results. While it's still too dangerous to get in the same enclosure with Eric, there is a lot of physical contact.
Oh, boy. Your target?
The target command gets his attention. It means a treat is coming, and Eric sticks his nose between 2 thick metal posts.
Oh, we spooked you. Did you spook yourself?
Rhinos can't see very well, but their sense of smell and hearing are both very sharp.
It's all up to him, essentially, and when he comes and participates with us, we give him the extra good goodies, his favorite treats.
Eric shows his affection by offering keepers his upper lip. The pointy appendage looks rough, but it's softer than one might think.
What does it taste like? KPBS?
Chomping on his reward is as close as a person might get to a rhino thank you. But that's not what keepers are looking for. They've been working closely with Eric for several months.
Normally, we would just let him be a rhino out in the field and have fun doing his own thing, and we would work with him in a behavioral context, maybe just getting him familiar with us and asking him simple things.
Eric has been restricted to the exhibit's livestock enclosure, or BOMA.
In the yard, we have the option to work between bedrooms, protective keeper grids where we stand behind, and then the crate itself. So we have several areas that we are working with him on a daily basis, multiple times, to kind of reinforce that positive training.
Keepers want Eric to be comfortable when it's time to get into the crate for his long trip to Africa.
Cool. Good news.
Steve Metzler is the safari park's curator of mammals, and he says the park has never released a captive-born rhino into the wild. The animal will be eased into his new surroundings, starting in a boma similar to the one in San Diego. Then, the rhino will get access to bigger parts of the reserve.
He's not a typical zoo rhino. He's been living with Cape buffalo and with African antelope and African birds, and so his life is actually pretty similar to what his life is going to be in Africa.
Metzler says Eric's parents were prolific, so the rhino's genes are overrepresented in the United States. That meant that he wasn't likely to breed here, but his gene line doesn't exist in Tanzania, and he could be a key part of an effort to reintroduce endangered black rhinos to the Serengeti.
It's an area that it's very wild, but it's also still
protected, and they have people that are going to be doing observations constantly. So they'll be watching him. They'll be watching his body condition. They'll be watching to see how often he's visiting the watering hole. They'll be watching to see if he's eating plants. What plants is he eating?
Eric won't be the biggest kid on the block anymore. He'll have to adjust to his new surroundings and the other animals, like elephants. And the zoo wants to make sure that he's safe from the biggest threat his species faces, man.
Poaching, of course, is always a concern for rhinos in Africa. That's why we've already been over there. We've checked out their plans. They have an amazing anti-poaching unit, great surveillance, and we know that that's a secure location.
Eric left the safari park in his crate this past weekend and arrived in Tanzania on Tuesday. Once he becomes acclimated, he'll get a chance to roam more widely and eventually breed with a female black rhino. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, sexual assault allegations against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh prompt calls for delaying his confirmation vote. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
The Carolinas are dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Florence. The Coast Guard continued rescuing victims today, in some cases as far away from the coast. This family is 70 miles away near the Lumber River in North Carolina.
Okay, until last night when the water just kept coming up and up.
At least 20 people have died in North and South Carolina due to the storm. Several people got swept up in storm waters. Officials worry that number could go up because it's still raining and the rivers continue to swell. The final week of summer will be warm and sunny in San Diego. Erin Caladra has details in tonight's forecast.
Well, thank you for joining us. I hope you had a great Monday as we kick off another work week. Taking a look at the satellite and radar, not much going on here in San Diego County. It is beautiful. Lots of sunshine, nice and dry. That's how it's going to be across the Southwest. Of course, we could use some rain, but it's not going to happen. We're just going to have some beautiful weather here throughout the week, really. Tonight, Oceanside at 59 degrees, Ramona at 50, Chula Vista at 63, and Borrego Springs reaching 71 for the low temperature. In the metro area, 66. Increasing clouds. You'll see them in the morning, and then plenty of sunshine throughout the day. So that's pretty much the story this week. It's going to be pleasant across much of California, getting warm across the deserts, but things are pretty just slightly above average, not by much across San Diego. So tomorrow, sunny at 76, Chula Vista as well, and in Ramona, 87, Borrego Springs at 104, and Mount Laguna in those upper 70s. Now, as far as Florence, it is now a tropical rainstorm and it has moved off to the north and east. We'll still see bursts of downpours across the Carolinas, but much of the rain is gone, and the big concern now is going to be the river flooding. It's going to continue for a couple of weeks, and some of these regions are saturated. Up to 40 inches of rain across Jacksonville, Wilmington. Wilmington is basically an island right now. There's no way in or out, and so evacuations will continue. It's still going to be a mess, but they will have drier weather by late week. So that will help with the recovery efforts. And for us here, it's going to be dry and nice, very typical weather. So here we are along the coast. Temperatures will remain in the 70s with clear skies. Inland, it's going to be sunny and nice. Temperatures in those mid 80s. And in the mountains, looking good. Temperatures getting just a bit cooler by Friday, down to 74, not bad. And then across the deserts, it's going to be nice. 104 Tuesday. And then we drop down to 99. That's going to feel kind of like a nice break here in the deserts. Of course, it does get a bit warmer by Friday. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra. Back to you.
In 50 days, California will elect a new governor. And in the last 120 years, voters have chosen a Democrat just 5 times. In 3 of those times, the winner was from the same family. The Browns of California looks at the family's role in the state's history from the gold rush through today. KQED's Scott Schaefer interviewed the author.
Miriam Powell, welcome to KQED Newsroom.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So this book is part history, it's part biography. Why did you decide to tell the story of California through the Brown family?
Because I thought that the 4 generations of Browns just so mirror the arc of that family, so mirrors the history of the state of California, that it was a great vehicle for saying some really fundamental things about the history of this place. And in turn, the family was so important and influential in shaping it. I mean, between Pat and Jerry Brown, they have governed the state for more than almost half of its modern history.
Yeah. And Pat Brown, of course, born in San Francisco, as was Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown's grandmother moved here from the ranch to get to the big city, I guess. And Pat Brown was elected governor in 1958. What kind of a politician was he?
Pat was the perfect politician for that era of this incredible expansion and explosion of the state, which to some degree mirrors, again, the way that California was formed, how it joined the Union. I mean, the other thing about the family is it's an immigrant story. It's about German immigrants and Irish immigrants and that sort of opportunity to remake yourself in California as a land of opportunity. And Pat was just, beloved, ebullient, gregarious person.
Kind of a backslapper.
Really believed that if he could just talk to everybody in the state one-on-one, he would win every single vote.
And how do you think California shaped him?
It'd be hard to find someone who is as passionate about the state as Pat Brown was. He just believed that it was the only place on earth you would want to live. That he was a backpacker into his advanced age, grew up going to Yosemite every summer, really instilled in his whole family a love of that outdoors and the environment and the importance of the natural world.
And as governor, he gets elected in 58, reelected in 62, beats Dick Nixon, and then Ronald Reagan comes along. What happened that led to his downfall and defeat in 1966?
The end of that era of expansion, that sense that suddenly bigger was not better, that the state was kind of out of control, the riots in Watts, the student rebellion in the campus of Berkeley, Ronald Reagan's campaign slogan was clean up the mess at Berkeley. Just
the free speech movement and all that stuff.
People were tired of Pat Brown, and they were ready for someone who was a good TV personality also, which was not something that Pat Brown was.
And Jerry Brown, before he got into politics, was in the seminary, Jesuit seminarian. How did that influence, do you think? How did it shape him as he did get into politics?
I think that the Jesuit piece of Jerry Brown is a very important and key part of his personality, his philosophy. Went to Jesuit high school, St. Ignatius, Santa Clara College for a year, and then 3.5 years in the seminary. And really, at a very formative age, and believes in a lot of those sort of core principles of the Jesuits.
And he, of course, was against the death penalty, which, seemed to get the family, both Pat and Jerry and his sister Kathleen, in trouble over the years. But he does get elected as a reformer to the governor's office in 1974, right during the Watergate era. And he turns right around and runs for president. And then he does it again in 1980. How did that go over with voters?
I think that his campaign in '76 was sort of remarkably successful, won the Maryland primary, so there was some sense that he was a young, charismatic, rising star. The 1980 race, not as successful, not as popular. Kind of a sense then of that he was, bored with the governorship and leaping at everything.
And very unfocused.
He is the first of that post-Watergate generation, cover of Time magazine, elected when he's 36 years old, really the face of the new politics.
Gallivanting with Linda Ronstadt in Africa, all those things. But people are tired of him, and he leaves office, fails to win a Senate race in 1982, and then he goes into as you describe it, the years of wilderness. What did he learn in Japan and studying Buddhism and working for 3 weeks with Mother Teresa, as you write? It's
Jerry Brown has such that fierce intensity of the intellect where when he focuses on something, he focuses on it very directly. So even the 3 weeks with Mother Teresa, enormously, sort of important impact on him. I think that whole period in the wilderness, he is exploring things and learning things about himself and about the world, but looking for a way back into politics, which ultimately he finds in Oakland, of all places.
Yeah, and he, of course, gets elected and reelected, and then he becomes Attorney General. Now he's governor, of course, in his last months. How do you think, he has obviously embraced the environment and climate change as his issue. Why do you think he's done that? What is it about his life up to now?
He has talked in times about how the environment is this core issue that really reminds him of his Jesuit training, that there were things that are pure and absolute about the environment and immutable and important. It's not like deciding whether you're going to buy a second car. It's about saving the world. And it's really a very sort of core values, and it's a consistent theme throughout his administrations. He has changed his positions on some things, but not really on environmental issues.
Interesting this week to hear him being criticized by some environmentalists for being not against oil enough.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you think, of course, it's hard to say what his legacy will be, but the Brown family, how will they be remembered?
I don't think you can find a family that has had the kind of impact on California that the Browns have had or will have. And again, also, here's Jerry Brown. I mean, what more California story can you have than someone who comes back after being out of the public eye for so long and is able to reinvent himself and come back and even undo and fix things that he did the first time around as governor that he decides in retrospect were mistakes. So
especially around criminal justice.
It's just this sort of an ultimate California story.
You had a chance to spend a fair amount of time with him in writing this book. What's your guess as to what he does next?
I think he will continue. He will go to Colusa, to the ranch that his great-grandfather settled on in the 1800s, and which he views as very much the ancestral home and an important, almost spiritual place. I think that he will try to be a force on climate change and on nuclear proliferation in the ways that he has been, and continue to be an international voice on those issues.
All right. The book is called The Browns of California. Miriam Powell, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. Have a great evening.